Now we've finally landed. We'll just exit the vehicle and... oh no. Oh no. Oh no. Let's try this again. Hello and welcome. This is Echo 3, and let's play Kerbal Space Program 2 Exploration Mode. For science, the first thing that we need to do is receive instructions from Mission Control. They're asking us to launch a rocket, so we'll make our way to the vehicle assembly building and begin construction. For some reason, Kerbal Kind in KSP2 has lost much of its technology learned from KSP1. In the original game, the only engines and fuel you had available were the solid rocket boosters. Now, in KSP2, the player starts off with decouplers, methalox fuel, and the swivel engines. With just the starting parts and the right design of rocket, the player can go anywhere in the Kerbal system with just the basic technology. For now though, I'm just trying to design a rocket that is able to achieve orbit. To reach orbit around Kerbin, the rocket will need about 3,400 meters per second of vacuum delta V. The reason I'm trying to reach orbit is this will let me complete the first several missions in just the first launch. The mod at the top that I am using to display this information is called Microengineer. I find it just a little easier to use than the stock delta V display. One of the best aspects about the original game were all the mods that were available. The modding community has already started making some very good ones for KSP2 as well. And several very talented mod developers have been hired to work on KSP2. Now that the rocket is assembled, with enough delta V and a high enough thrust-to-weight ratio, it's time for the most important part, giving it a nice paint job. This used to only be achievable with mods in the original game, but now, in the center bottom right, is an icon for choosing how to paint your rocket. One final thing I'd like to do with this rocket is to add a few fins to the bottom of it to help keep it a little bit more stable during the initial part of the launch. All wings are now procedural wings, so after placing them, you can select them with the wrench icon and set exactly how you want them to look. I'm just going to increase the wingspan by a little bit, and that should be sufficient. The atmosphere in this sequel game seems to be just a little bit different than in the original. However, the old advice of trying to be tilted at 45 degrees by 10,000 meters still seems to be pretty solid. After that, just try to have the rocket hold prograde, and it should be on a good course to get into orbit. The beaker icon on the top left of the screen indicates when we have an opportunity to collect science. So usually all we have to do is just click on that and it will gather the science for us. At this point, we have successfully launched our first rocket, so we can go back to Mission Control and select a few more missions to get. The next mission is to escape the atmosphere. Since we've already done that, we'll go ahead and select it and complete it immediately as well. Finally, we'll get another mission to achieve orbit. Since we've already done that, we will also complete it immediately as well. So on just our first launch, we're able to gather quite a bit of science. Thus, with just the first launch and the starting technology, the player is able to gather quite a bit of science points to unlock better parts to go further in the Kerbin system. And with that, I will go ahead and flip the rocket retrograde and burn just enough to put the rocket on a suborbital trajectory. One of our next objectives is to splash down on Kerbin, so I'm aiming for the water. Re-entry heating has recently been added to the game, and it seems pretty brutal. Some players have decided to turn that off. I have turned mine down to 50%. We have successfully splashed down. I'm going to have the Kerbal get out and gather some samples from the water. You'd think they would have already done this already, having lived on the planet for who knows how long, but we're going to go ahead and do that and gather some more science points. With all of these wonderful science points that I have collected, I'll be going over to the R&D Center to unlock some new parts. But before I do that, I'm going to see what my next mission is going to be. And it looks like I have unlocked going to the Mun. So when I go over to the Research and Development Center, I'll be focusing on parts that will help me gather more science and that will help make it easier to go to the Mun and return safely. The first thing I unlock is light launchers because it's my only choice, then environmental science because it unlocks a new science experiment, then probes. because it gives me batteries and solar panels. Then aerodynamic and stability, because I really want survivability to unlock heat shields. Next, I would really like to have the Terrier engine, which is unlocked in orbital rocketry. It's a very efficient vacuum engine. And then Mun landing, so that I have some good landing legs to land on the Mun with. When I build my rockets, I start at the end of the mission and work my way to the start of the mission. For landing on Kerbin, I'm going to need a parachute and a heat shield. To return back from Kerbin, from the surface of the Mun, I'm going to need a rocket with at least 900 meters per second of delta V. This stage technically has enough to land on the Mun, launch, and get me all the way back to Kerbin, because it takes at a minimum 580 meters per second to go from low Mun orbit to land on the surface, and it takes another 580 to go from the Mun surface back to low Mun orbit. For me anyway, I have found it's better to budget in some comfortable margins to work with. The 2 solar panels on the pod will be enough to keep the batteries fully charged for the duration of the mission. This is the cruiser stage. It will help with some of the 850 meters per second to leave Kerbin and go to the Mun, and the 310 meters per second to get into Mun orbit. And finally, it will take an additional 3,400 meters per second of delta V to get into low Kerbin orbit. So for a Mun landing and return mission, I'm looking at wanting at least 6,100 meters per second of delta V. And that 6,100 number is the absolute minimum. I should probably go a little higher than that so I can account for my mistakes that I will inevitably make. Right now the rocket is sitting at somewhere around 6,500 meters per second of vacuum delta V. That technically is enough and should give me a small margin for any mistakes that I will probably make. This doesn't give me a large margin for error, but enough of a margin that any small mistakes won't doom the mission. The other important numbers to watch out for are the thrust-to-weight ratio. The rocket should have at least a 1.3 thrust-to-weight ratio for getting off of the surface of Kerbin, and for landing on the Mun, you'd want at least a thrust-to-weight ratio of 4 or higher. And just to be clear, that's referencing the body that you are landing on or taking off from. If you are OCD and you notice that my rocket is misaligned, don't worry, I am fixing that. I noticed it too. I just had some problems placing those parts on the decouplers, but I'm going to get that straightened out and it will look fine. Now we're going to go ahead and launch for the Mun. We're going to start tilting the rocket right away, trying to be tilted around 45 degrees by 10 kilometers, and then generally keeping the rocket pointed prograde. I want to keep an eye on my time to apoapsis marker, because I want that to keep increasing. I really don't want it to get below 1 minute at this point. If you are new to the game and wondering why am I launching to the right or to the east, that is because Kerbin spins that direction, and so I get about 180 meters per second boost to my orbital velocity if I go with the direction Kerbin is spinning. Now I'm going to place a maneuver node and try to get into a circular orbit around Kerbin. Now that I'm in orbit, I'm going to drop another maneuver node and plot a course out to the Mun. If you have played the original game, then this process of going to the Mun is very familiar. If you have not, then I would recommend using the tutorials that come in Kerbal Space Program 2, as they are excellent. I start the burn out to the Mun using my core stage. Then, when it's out of fuel, I'll decouple it and finish it with my cruiser stage. So far, the mission is going according to plan. My current mission just requires that I get into orbit around the Mun, so at my periapsis, I will plot a retrograde maneuver in order to slow down enough to be captured into Mun orbit. And every time I see that beaker on the left side of the screen blink, I will click on it to gather the science. In the bottom right of the screen, the game displays my total delta V, and as I burn to enter the Mun's orbit, I notice that I am still on track to being able to complete my objectives. I'll just take a moment here to gather some science while in EVA around the Mun. With the objective to orbit the Mun completed, the next one is to try to land on the Mun. So just like with the first launch, I am attempting to complete multiple missions on this second launch. I was clicking a little fast there, but what I would do is hit escape, select mission control, submit the reports, then hit escape again and go to the tracking station, select my craft, and then continue on with my mission. This mission to land on the Mun requires that we land in one of the Mara biomes. These are those large, dark, flat areas on the Mun. Currently, there's not an easy way to see the different regions in the game. Maybe that will be added once the resource collection is also implemented. There are 5 different regions for the Mun, and these would be fairly similar to the biomes on the first game. Now I'm trying to eyeball this landing and make sure I slow down adequately before I touch down. And my craft is leaning a little bit, so I'm going to try to move it to some more level ground so that it doesn't tip over when my Kerbal gets out. Now that I have reached the Mun surface, it's time to collect some science, and most importantly, plant a flag. Now there isn't really much more for me to do here on the Mun surface. I used up my Delta V budget on the landing, so there's pretty much just enough to get back to Kerbin. Again, I launch east, and am trying to get into a pretty low orbit. I burn prograde at my apoapsis to circularize my orbit. Next, I'm attempting to eject the Mun on its retrograde side, or the back side of its orbit. I have clicked on my periapsis so I could see exactly where that is, and it's around 44 kilometers above Kerbin, which will get me into its atmosphere. With the ejection burn completed, and a course set for Kerbin's atmosphere, there aren't any more burns that I will have to do in order to land back on the surface. I'll use the last bit of fuel in this rocket to slow down just a little bit. It won't be much, but I like to do it anyway. Then, with the fuel gone, I'll decouple that section and let the pod slow down the rest of the way in the atmosphere. The heat shield did its job, and the parachute works. Now, I just splash down into the ocean and recover the craft. All that's left to do now is to spend those science points. Just like before, my priorities are to unlock more science parts. And I'm also looking for parts that will make it easier to travel further in the Kerbal system. Mostly that's bigger parts, more powerful engines, and more efficient vacuum engines. This is Echo 3. Thanks for joining me. I will see you next time.